Okay, let's talk about fixing up our queries so that they have a little bit more information in them and uh, have something that, as a report, they will look a little bit more interesting to whatever user is using them. I'm going to bring up my regex query. Actually, let me start again. I'm going to start again because when I start this, I don't really want to show my favorite queries necessarily.
Okay.
I may have done that once, but I'm trying to avoid that. Okay, so all right. We're going to talk about getting our output to look a little bit more interesting to users that might use our reports. We do that by editing fields on the query. So I'm going to bring up my regex query, and I'm going to edit it. And it right away, as we say, dumps me into the Fields tab. Because the assumption usually is that what you want to do first when you're looking at a query or editing a query is to look into this Fields tab and see if there's some tweaks you want to make here. Now, if this were a query that belonged to somebody else, I think the first thing I would want to do is go to my Query tab and see what tables were selected and see what order they were in. I might want to go over and see what prompts are available to me. And then I might want to take a look at the criteria as well and say, how are they paring this down? And with the criteria, notice they're putting business units together. They've got joins here. That's whenever I see fields to fields, that usually indicates that tables were joined together. And then I notice that I also have a prompt here that gives me a date range. And so that is what I'm looking at here. I'm going to run this query because I'm curious as to what the output is going to look like. I think I'm going to pick up that August date again because I know from another lesson that we have several bits of criteria within August. And I love using these, although I could have typed my date range in, but I love using clicking on the boxes. So I'm going to hit OK. And I noticed that I've got a lot of different things in here that are useful information. When I'm looking at a high level and I'm just wanting to look at spend, I may just want to look at what the dates are, how much money is getting spent out of recs, and then also were all these recs approved? Were these recs pending? Were they sourced to a PO? So I've got letters here, but if I'm not familiar with those codes or I want it more readable, then I want to do some editing. And then also I might want to change and make some of these fields a little bit more readable, longer. Notice the distribution line is only distribution Y. And, you know, other things like that I might want to make a little bit more readable. Well, the way I do that is on my Fields tab. Keep in mind the Fields tab is your output tab. This is what's going to appear in the report and how it's going to appear. Right now, it's going to put all these out with these particular headings. And then two of the fields are status fields, and they actually, in addition in the record of having just a letter, they also have a table behind them that tells me what this letter means. And I can put the description from that table. Now, because it's an XLAT, I don't have to add another table with a join to get this value. I just need to edit these particular fields. So let's start with that. So I've got a status here, and I want to determine what this status means. So I'm going to click on my edit. And notice, because it's got an XLAT, that I have this thing here called a translate value, this little section. Now, the one thing I do want to mention here as we're looking at edit field properties is that this is also where I would change the text and make it more readable. Aggregate if I wanted to sum or count this field, which for a status field is not terribly useful to me. Maybe if I wanted to count how many pending recs, I could do a count. But then what I'm focusing on right now is the translate value. And like I said, sometimes you want, instead of just the letter, you want a bit of a description. So I'm going to change the description to short. That's all I did on this thing. We did a little review of this whole area. Current date, I never touch this area because this is advanced query function. So all we did was we changed translate value from none to short. So now it says S instead of N over here by rec status. So let me save and run the query and see what that looks like. So I'm going to put in my date range again, but I think this time what I want to do is I want to include a wider range and see if I have any other statuses. So I put in August 1st through October 1st. Now I can see that my status for my rec is pending. And I also have a few that are actually in approved status. And that's because I changed that XLAT value to short. Now I can also change it to long, but long usually does not add all that much value to your query status. So short usually works very well, and that's the one I like to use the most. Now here's the thing, it just says status. I'm assuming it's rec status, but wouldn't it be nice if it said rec status on that header? So I'm going to go back to my Fields tab, and remember that when I changed the XLAT value to short, I did that on the Edit button. So I'm going to come back to Edit button where I've got short here, and I'm going to come over to my heading section, and I'm going to change the heading text to rec status. So I'm going to click text, which you must always click, or else it just picks up the default from the short field, RFT short. And I'm going to put in the word rec. So now I know that it's the requisition status. Notice I didn't touch the unique field name. We always leave that alone. I didn't have anything else I wanted to change. And so I'm going to say OK. So now it says in my heading text, rec status. It also has this translate value is short, which we had already changed. And I'm going to save and run my query. I'm going to put in my same date range because I know I've got some different types of statuses, and I want to see what that looks like. So now I see rec status pending and approved. And so now this is much more readable report. Now, one of the things that I might want to do is for a given date, I might want to sum up all the amounts to see how much spend I have for a given date, and maybe even for a given day. I might want to, I'm not really that concerned about quantity. Quantity 1 doesn't matter. So I may just pull the quantity out, and I may just want to see what my total spend is here. So let's go ahead over to Fields and remove some of these things that I'm not interested in anymore. Maybe I'm not interested in the fact that they're already they are pending or approved, but then again, that might be interesting to me. I've got my entered date, and then I'm going to get rid of my quantity amount, and I'm not interested in some of these other fields, so I'm just going to take them out of here because I'm just really interested in what the money looks like for a day. So now I've got rid of some extra fields. I'm going to save it and run it. I don't know, sometimes clicking it, you're not sure if you've done it or not. So I'm going to go back to my August date. See how handy it is to have these as prompts rather than as constant values, because you can play around with a lot more. So now I see that I've got these different amounts. And I've got requisition ID. Now the thing is, I'm keeping these as separate lines because I've got these separate requisition IDs. So if I wanted to sum this, I think I'd want to just find out by date. I don't really care about the ID. So let's get rid of requisition ID. Or rec name, actually, on this case. And so now I've got this set up, but I want to make sure that this is going to sum everything by rec date. And maybe I don't really care about entered date and rec date because they're probably about the same. So let's just get rid of that too. And now I'm going to sort this in rec date order so that I get all the amounts on a given date together before I go ahead and start summing. So here I go. I've got on the new order by is by rec date. And maybe a good idea would be to order it by status too, so I can separate the pending items from the approved items. So I'm going to say okay. I'm going to save it and I'm going to run it and see where we're at now. Very good. Now all my rec dates are in order and I've got in my amounts. Now there's a couple ways I can do this. I could just throw this out to an Excel spreadsheet and put a subtotal on this. But the other thing I can do is if I want to quickly look and see how much money was spent on a given day, I can also use an aggregate value. Aggregates are where we want to either sum or count a specific field or fields. So I want to sum merchandise a date, and it's going to sum it based on whatever criteria or fields rather, I have separated it here. So it's going to end up summing it based on the rec date and the rec status, because there are also items that I'm including here. So what I'll do with merchandise amount is I'll edit that. And instead of giving myself a single merchandise amount for in every line, I'll change it to getting the sum of them for the date and the status. So now it's going to sum it. And notice how aggregate now says sum. So now I can say save, and I'm going to run it. And then let's see what we have in the way of sum. There you go. So on 8/17, fair amount of spend, but my most spend was on the 8/18. Remember when I was looking at all those records and I said, wow, we've got a lot of records on the 18th. Well, here it is. We've a ton of spend on the 18th for some reason. But then October is starting off rather just trickling in, and it's just got a few items in here.